a 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee who survived bombs and missiles in her war-torn homeland was brutally stabbed to death on a Charlotte light rail train. Her killer? A man with 14 prior arrests who was released by a judge not even qualified to practice law in North Carolina. Right now, over 11,000 people have signed a petition demanding this judge be removed, and every Republican congressman from North Carolina is calling for her ouster. This is the story of Iryna Zarutska and why an entire state is demanding justice. Iryna Zarutska was 23 years old when her life ended in late August 2025. She had already survived one of the most brutal conflicts of our time, the war in Ukraine. Air raid sirens, bombing campaigns, constant fear of death, and the heartbreak of leaving everything behind brought her to America seeking safety and opportunity. The journey from war-torn Ukraine to Charlotte, North Carolina wasn't just a change of location. It was a complete transformation of everything she knew. Like thousands of Ukrainian refugees, Iryna was rebuilding her life from scratch. Learning English, navigating American culture, finding work, making friends, establishing herself in a completely foreign environment. Every day presented new challenges but also new possibilities. Iryna represented what America has always stood for, a beacon of hope for those fleeing persecution and violence. She was part of the wave of Ukrainian refugees who came to the United States after Russia's invasion, people who had lost homes, jobs, sometimes family members, but refused to lose hope for a better future. Her presence in Charlotte was a testament to human resilience. She had made the difficult decision to leave behind everything familiar, her language, her culture, her homeland, to start over in a place where she could build a safe, productive life. She was learning to navigate American systems, contributing to her new community, and slowly building the foundation for what should have been decades of life ahead. On what should have been an ordinary day, Iryna rode Charlotte's light rail system that thousands use daily for work, school, and daily activities. This public transportation network serves as a lifeline for the community, connecting neighborhoods, enabling commerce, and providing affordable mobility for residents. It should be safe and routine. For Iryna, it became a death trap. The young woman who had survived missiles, artillery, and the chaos of war died on American public transportation, killed by a complete stranger who should never have been free to hurt anyone. The irony is devastating. She escaped a war zone only to be murdered in what should have been the safety of her adopted country. DeCarlos Brown took Iryna's life, and his background reveals why so many call this murder completely preventable. According to his sister Teresa Brown, DeCarlos had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and suffered from severe hallucinations and paranoia. This wasn't some recent development or minor mental health concern. This was documented, diagnosed serious mental illness that should have been a massive red flag to every person in the criminal justice system who encountered him. Mental illness alone doesn't make someone a killer. Millions of Americans live with schizophrenia and other mental health conditions without hurting anyone. The vast majority of people with mental illness are more likely to be victims of crime than perpetrators. But when you combine untreated or inadequately managed severe mental illness with a documented pattern of violent criminal behavior, you create what experts call a perfect storm, a walking time bomb that threatens public safety. DeCarlos Brown was exactly that kind of time bomb, and the system had more than a decade to recognize it and take appropriate action. Over more than 10 years, Brown was arrested 14 separate times. 14. These weren't minor infractions like traffic violations or public intoxication. These were serious criminal charges including possession of a firearm by a felon, robbery with a dangerous weapon, and other violent offenses that should have triggered immediate concern about public safety. Each of those 14 arrests represented a critical decision point. 14 separate occasions where law enforcement had to intervene because Brown was allegedly breaking the law. 14 opportunities for prosecutors, judges, and mental health professionals to recognize a dangerous pattern and implement appropriate interventions. 14 chances to get Brown the intensive mental health treatment he clearly needed while simultaneously protecting the community from potential violence. The pattern was unmistakable. Here was someone with documented severe mental illness repeatedly coming into contact with law enforcement for increasingly serious offenses. Every criminology textbook, every public safety manual, Every piece of professional training warns about exactly this type of escalating pattern. Yet somehow the system failed to connect these obvious dots. Despite this extensive criminal history, despite his documented severe mental illness, despite every warning sign imaginable, Brown was walking freely through Charlotte when he decided to murder Iryna Zarutska. According to all available reports, there was no connection between Brown and his victim, no prior relationship, no personal dispute, no apparent motive whatsoever. This was what law enforcement calls a stranger-on-stranger crime, the kind that generates maximum fear in communities because it appears completely random and unpredictable. But Brown's attack on Iryna wasn't truly random. It was the predictable culmination of a system that repeatedly failed to take appropriate action when presented with clear evidence of danger. Magistrate Judge Teresa Stokes made the decision that many believe led directly to this tragedy, and understanding the details of that decision helps explain why the public outrage has been so intense and sustained. In January 2025, just months before Iryna would lose her life, Brown appeared before Judge Stokes' court facing yet another criminal charge. At that moment, Judge Stokes had access to Brown's complete criminal history, all 14 prior arrests, the pattern of increasingly serious charges, the documented mental health issues. She had the power to set a high bond that might have kept him in custody pending trial. She could have required electronic monitoring to track his movements. She could have mandated intensive mental health treatment as a condition of release. She could have imposed strict supervision requirements with regular check-ins. Instead, Judge Stokes chose the most minimal option available. She released DeCarlos Brown on nothing more than a written promise to appear in court. No financial incentive to show up. No monitoring to ensure compliance. No treatment requirements to address his obvious mental health needs. Just his signature on a piece of paper, the same signature he had presumably provided 13 times before when making similar promises to appear. This decision allowed Brown to move freely through Charlotte streets, using public transportation, interacting with innocent people like Iryna Zarutska who had no way of knowing they were sharing space with someone who posed a significant danger. Every day that Brown remained free after Judge Stokes' decision was another day that the community faced unnecessary risk. But here's where this story takes an even more shocking turn, one that helps explain why the calls for Judge Stokes' removal have reached such a fever pitch. Teresa Stokes, the woman who made this life-and-death decision about public safety, isn't even qualified to practice law in the state of North Carolina. According to the official state database of licensed attorneys maintained by the North Carolina State Bar, Judge Stokes lacks the basic legal qualifications that most citizens would reasonably expect someone making such critical judicial decisions to possess. She's not a licensed attorney in the state where she's making decisions about bonds, releases, and public safety. This revelation raises fundamental questions about judicial system oversight and accountability. How does someone without proper legal credentials end up in a position to make decisions that can literally determine whether people live or die? What vetting process, if any, was used before placing Judge Stokes in this position? How many other similar decisions has she made without the legal background that would normally inform such critical choices? Public outrage quickly reached North Carolina's highest political levels. On September 9, 2025, Congressman Tim Moore posted on X, "Today, I led a letter calling for the removal of Magistrate Judge Teresa Stokes, who released a 14-time offender who went on to murder Iryna Zarutska in Charlotte. This tragedy was preventable. There must be accountability. North Carolinians deserve better. This tragedy was preventable captures exactly why this case generates such intense anger. Iryna didn't have to die. Her murder wasn't unforeseeable, it was the predictable result of system failures, with Judge Stokes' release decision being the final, fatal link. Moore didn't act alone. All 10 North Carolina House Republicans signed a formal letter demanding Judge Stokes' removal, addressed directly to Chief District Court Judge Roy Wiggins. Complete unanimity among the delegation demonstrates how egregious these failures were. This isn't political theater, it's an official request for judicial accountability. The grassroots response to this case has been nothing short of extraordinary, demonstrating how a single preventable tragedy can mobilize thousands of people who refuse to accept systemic failures as inevitable. A Change.org petition demanding Judge Stokes' removal has exploded across social media platforms, gathering over 11,000 signatures and continuing to grow daily. But these numbers represent far more than digital activism. They reflect the community's collective outrage and determination to prevent similar tragedies. The petition signers come from diverse backgrounds but share common concerns. North Carolina residents who use the same public transportation system where Iryna was killed see this case as a direct threat to their own safety and that of their families. Parents worry about their children's security when using buses, trains, and other public transit. Fellow immigrants and refugees view Iryna's story as a betrayal of America's fundamental promise to provide safety and opportunity for those fleeing persecution. But the outrage extends far beyond North Carolina's borders, tapping into nationwide frustration with criminal justice systems that seem to prioritize processing cases quickly over protecting public safety. People across the country have signed this petition because they recognize that similar failures exist in their own communities, the same revolving doors for repeat offenders, the same inadequate mental health resources, the same judges who seem disconnected from the real-world consequences of their decisions. Social media has amplified these calls for justice in unprecedented ways. Hashtags related to this case have trended nationally on platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok, bringing attention to what might otherwise have remained a local tragedy. Online discussions have created virtual communities of people sharing their own experiences with judicial failures and demanding systematic reforms. The digital response has been particularly powerful because it gives voice to ordinary citizens who often feel powerless when confronted with bureaucratic indifference. These are people who are sick of being told that tragedies like Iryna's are simply the price society pays for maintaining civil liberties and due process protections. They're demanding better solutions and rejecting the usual excuses about complex legal issues or the need for judicial independence. Comments on the petition and related social media posts reveal the depth of public emotion. People write things like, "This could have been my daughter on that train," and "How many more innocent people must die before we hold these judges accountable for their decisions?" These aren't abstract policy debates conducted in academic settings. They're personal expressions of fear, anger, and determination to create changes that will prevent future tragedies. This case forces confrontation with fundamental questions about our justice system. How do we balance defendant rights with public safety? What qualifications should judges have before making life and death decisions? How do we handle repeat offenders with serious mental illness? These questions lack simple answers, but Iryna's death demands we confront them. A woman who survived war was killed in what should have been safe American public space by someone who should have been in custody. DeCarlos Brown faces murder charges, though the judicial process will determine his fate. Meanwhile, pressure for Judge Stokes' removal continues building from both political leaders and the public demanding accountability. The case sparked broader conversations about judicial reform, criminal justice, mental health treatment, and protecting vulnerable populations like refugees seeking American safety. Various advocacy groups are pushing for systematic changes to prevent similar tragedies. Legal experts debate what mechanisms exist for removing judges and what standards should apply. Some argue this case represents exactly why judicial accountability measures need strengthening, while others caution about maintaining judicial independence. Iryna Zarutska's murder represents far more than another crime statistic that will fade from memory. This case has become a symbol of everything wrong with systems that prioritize bureaucratic convenience over human lives, judicial processes that ignore obvious warning signs, and a culture of accountability avoidance that leaves dangerous people free to harm innocent victims. Iryna's story is particularly heartbreaking because of what she represented, the American dream in its purest form. She had survived war, escaped destruction, and made the incredibly difficult decision to leave behind everything familiar to start over in a foreign country. She was learning English, building relationships, contributing to her new community, and slowly constructing what should have been the foundation for decades of productive life ahead. She embodied the best possibilities of immigration to America, someone who had faced genuine persecution, overcome enormous obstacles, and was working to build a better life through legal means. Her presence in Charlotte made the community stronger, more diverse, and more connected to the global struggles for freedom and safety that define our era. The man who killed her should have been in custody. The judge who released him shouldn't have been making such decisions without proper qualifications. The system that allowed this tragedy should be held accountable and reformed to prevent similar failures in the future. Thousands of people calling for accountability in this case aren't motivated by political partisanship or abstract policy preferences. They're driven by the fundamental belief that preventable tragedies should be prevented, that obvious dangers should be recognized and addressed, and that people in positions of authority should be held responsible when their decisions lead to avoidable harm. The fight for justice in Iryna Zarutska's case represents something larger than one family's grief or one community's outrage. It's about whether we're willing to demand better from the systems that are supposed to protect us, whether we'll accept obvious failures as inevitable, and whether we have the collective will to make the changes necessary to honor the memory of someone who deserved so much better. If this story has moved you, if you believe that Judge Stokes should face consequences for her decision, if you think Iryna Zarutska deserved better protection from the country she chose to call home, then your voice matters in this fight for accountability. Share this information, support the calls for reform, and help ensure that Iryna's death leads to changes that could save other innocent lives. The ultimate tribute to Iryna Zarutska's memory would be creating a system where no other family has to endure what hers is experiencing now, where obvious threats are recognized and addressed before they become tragedies, and where the people we trust with life and death decisions are actually qualified to make them wisely. Should Judge Stokes be immediately removed from her position? What systematic reforms are needed to prevent similar tragedies? How can communities better balance defendant rights with public safety? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for continued coverage of this developing story and other cases where justice and accountability matter.